In today's video, we're going to be talking about this all-new Honda CR-V. It's a mid-size SUV which has given its segment a pretty big shake-up since it was introduced in Australia last year. It's been described as many things. Impressive, surprisingly luxurious, and also just a big step for the Honda brand in Australia. However, after my week of testing, I've come up with a term of my own, and that's minimalist. You see, when it comes to cars, I think we're doing the whole minimalism thing all wrong. Often that word invokes images of very tech-heavy cars, which, while quite impressive in their own right, aren't always the easiest to use every day. The CR-V, however, is a little bit of a different story. This is a vehicle which isn't really bringing out all that many innovations. However, its ability to nail the basics from drivability and also cabin usability and even through to the ownership proposition and its simplicity makes it a car which pulls together to be a very tempting ownership proposition as a car that you're actually going to live with every day. The grade I have with me today is the VTI L7. It's one of two 7-seat equipped grades in the new CR-V range, and it starts at $53,000, but that's drive away. So this week, my family and I have spent a great deal of time getting to know every one of the CR-V's 7 seats and also its multitude of features to get to the bottom of what it's like to actually own this car and live with it properly. However, it's important to remember that the Honda doesn't exist in isolation. As a mid-size-esque 7-seat SUV, there are actually a few rivals out there. Think the Nissan X-Trail, the Skoda Kodiaq, and Volkswagen Allspace, and even the Mitsubishi Outlander, to name a few. And the question that I want to answer today is, does the CR-V's keep it simple, stupid mantra add up to a proposition that makes it more appealing than those rivals? Well, today we're going to find out. But before we get started on today's video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down below if you want to see more content like this.
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct.
So jumping into the interior of the Honda, we're presented with one of my favorite parts of this car. Just as the exterior is clean in its design, so is the interior. I really quite like the layout of this. It plays into that minimalist theme that I was talking about before, and I think it goes against this narrative of thinking that physical buttons and other controls taking up the space add to a cluttered look, because I don't think this looks cluttered at all. And personally, when I think of minimalism, I think of something which makes things simple and easy to do, and that is exactly what this interior achieves in so many different regards. So for example, we do have these switches which are directly down here. Everything is very easy to understand, and it comes naturally to a lot of people. If you're recommending a car to your grandparents, for example, they're going to get in this car and they're going to immediately understand it. Even when you look up to this 9-inch touchscreen here, it's limited in its size. You know, there are some bigger ones out there, but the OS is really easy to understand. You've got some buttons along the side, and the touchscreen itself is very responsive and quite crisp to look at. So those who don't have the best eyesight in the world aren't going to struggle to see what's on the screen. That extends over to the steering wheel we've got here. So it's leather, it's really nice in the hand, and you might notice that we've got this little guide rail here. And essentially that's like a bit of unconscious intuition for your mind to know whereabouts your fingers are on the steering wheel without looking down. And that's really quite fantastic in my opinion. I think there's also a lot to be said for how much of a quality item this CR-V feels to use. These buttons feel super nice and clicky, and they always return really quickly to their natural position. So if you're cycling through something quickly, it's not going to be slow and sloppy like the previous generation was. And the scroll wheel here is really rewarding, and that extends to other things around the cabin. I think my favorite is this volume knob here. It's clicky and it goes into place, and you don't have to think about what you're doing. You're not fiddling with a touchscreen. You're not swiping up or swiping down. It just works how it's supposed to. And I find that really rewarding when I'm using this car every day. There's also something to be said for the durability of a lot of the materials in this car. We've got some slightly soft, but also fairly durable materials on the door tops and also the armrest here. And when we look to the center console down here, we're not seeing a swath of gloss black, which is going to be scratched up in seconds. We're seeing some durable plastics here. And you know, as a family car, I think that's really quite important. Touching on some of the more basic aspects of the interior, visibility is pretty good out, and I think the driver's seat is pretty darn comfortable. It's got power adjustment on the driver's side and the passenger side, though I will note that only the driver has lumbar support on this model. The passenger is unfortunately restricted to 4-way adjustment. Storage is another win for the CR-V. We start with the armrest, which opens up to reveal an additional 9 liters of storage. It's absolutely huge. It goes all the way down, and you get this little shelf here to put your bits and and bobs on. We've also got a couple of different places to store our sunglasses. We've got one here, and we've also got this one up in the ceiling, and this one has a double use. You might have seen this on the previous generation CR-V, and it pops out to reveal an analog mirror here. And this is great, though of course when it comes to nighttime, you're not going to be able to see what's in the back seat because there's going to be no light to illuminate those back seats. So there is some areas where, for example, a digital solution like we are seeing on some other more high-end products is proving to be a bit more handy, but even still, that's a pretty darn useful feature for during the day. In other areas of storage, we have the center door bins here, and this is not all that great, I think. It's got a little bit of storage here. However, I can't fit my 1 litre bottle in the door here without turning it into a bow shape, so perhaps a little bit more improvement there. In terms of tech, look, we've got this 9-inch touchscreen. As I said, we do have wireless Apple CarPlay, though unfortunately, Android Auto remains wired, so that's a little bit annoying, I think. We've got this wireless phone charger down here, but it's better than most, I think, and the reason for that is it has got some guide rails either side, and it does have a naturally quite grippy texture, and you also have the ability to turn it off and on as needed, so if the phone's starting to get a little bit hot, you can simply reach down and turn it off. So that's pretty good, I think. This model has got an 8-speaker stereo system, which sounds, look, decent. It's nothing too crash hot, but it's certainly decent enough for what this vehicle is. And as far as things that it's missing, well, it's not all that much, I think. It would be great to have a heads-up display on this grade, but alas, it was not to be. And also, there's no 360 camera on this one. There's only a reversing camera, which I think is a little bit disappointing. I'd personally really want that one on my family car. Finally, if you are tossing up between the VTI X7 and the VTI L7, which is this model, there are some things that you lose by going down to that cheaper model and saving yourself that $60 to $100. So the first is the panoramic sunroof here. Personally, I'm a little bit take it or leave it with that one, trying to avoid as much sun damage as I can. You also get cloth seats on here instead of the leather seats that we have here. The seats are also heated on this model, and you also get leather touches on the steering wheel and the shifter. So that's a little bit disappointing, but no major losses in this cabin, I think. I think it still ticks all the main boxes, and fundamentally, the ergonomics are still pretty good, as I said. So starting out pretty good in the front seat of the CR-V, let's see what the second and third rows are like. Jumping into the back seat now, you can see I have an absolutely huge amount of room. Heaps of knee room, heaps of toe room, and just room to actually move around if you're doing a long road trip. I'm 6 foot tall, so that's not something I can say for every model though. As far as headroom, look, it's a little bit close. You know, if you're 6'2", you're probably not gonna have a great time back here, but I think it's serviceable for most adults. As far as other things about this interior, look, we have a nice padded armrest here. Nice hard door tops. They do revert from soft to hard in the back seat, as we often see on a few models. It's disappointing we don't have some pull-up sunshades on this one. I don't think you can actually get those on any CR-V model. We've got privacy glass, which offers a little bit of tinting, but I'd be looking at an aftermarket solution for that one if I was you. And as far as other amenities, look, we've got some air vents down here, a little bit small, but they'll do the job. And we've got 2 USB-C charging points, which should be pretty speedy to top up those devices. It's also a pretty genuine 3-row proposition, this one. You've got a flat floor, and this middle seat is quite wide. And the back seats themselves actually do have a good amount of shape to hold you in place and keep you relatively comfortable. Also in this interior, look, we've got a little bit of storage in the sides of the door here, though not anything that's going to fit a large bottle, as was the case with the front. And we can pull down the armrest here. It's pretty sturdy, and you get some smaller cup holders here, but though I wouldn't think that would really fit much more than a small coffee. Now, the seats themselves, they are equipped with ISOFIX points on the outboard seats. The top tether for this one, for the middle seat, is over in the middle of the roof there. So that is kind of going to get in the way of third row occupants, but you're probably not going to have people back there all the time. We can move these seats forward to make more room in the third row, like so. So let's go check those out right now. Jumping into the third row now, and I think the first thing I want to touch on is the fact that it's quite easy to get in the back here. Yes, it's not very graceful, but as far as actually logistically getting in, you lift up the lever on the second row and it moves forward and then it moves up to help make some more space for you, so larger occupants like myself can get in the back fairly easily. It's also a nice little handle on the edge of the door here to help wrench yourself in, and once you're inside, it's Look, it's not amazing for a 6 foot tall person like myself, but I've certainly found it more difficult to be in some other vehicles. The second seats do slide forward, as I said, so you can make yourself a little bit of room. I've kind of put myself as a bit of a halfway measure between where the seat was, which was all the way back, and I don't want to put it hard up against the front seat. So it's in a good position here, which I think a second row occupant would still be fairly comfortable. As far as amenities look, there are a few things. I personally quite like this cup holder, which comes up like so when you actually want it, and then you can fold it down so you can have it as an armrest, or you don't want to get things in the way of the boot when you're loading things in there. So a clever little maneuver there. However, my absolute favorite thing about this third row is these air vents they have down here, which are extremely clever. So you might notice that I've got two sets of, I'm going to call them gills for lack of a better word, and you can aim them directly onto your face. And I can't remember any other midsize SUV-esque vehicle that has 7 seats, which actually has air vents this close to your face. Even some proper 3-row SUVs out there don't have such good ventilation. And add to that, the fact that the visibility is actually pretty darn good. This little porthole here is bigger than some others I've seen out there, that's for sure. And I can see a good amount of the second window right in front of me. So if you're a little bit car sick, you're not going to struggle as much in this vehicle as some others, I think. However, that's not even the last good thing about this air vent system. You see, you've got a separate fan control here. It goes off and then 1, 2, and 3, and this can be controlled through the front seat, so you can turn that off and on as needed. And one of the main reasons that this is so great is because when you have a rearwards facing baby seat, it's often a little bit difficult to actually get some ventilation onto the face of your baby, because with those typical setups you have between the center console, it often goes on the knees and doesn't properly circulate towards the face of your baby in that rearwards position. So you can actually have it positioned directly on them, and that is honestly just such a tremendous feature in a family car. Okay, so what's it like to put baby seats in? Well, of course, that starts with how wide we can open the door, and this is perhaps the best I have ever seen. The CR-V comes out pretty much to 90 degrees. Honestly, if you're gonna go further than that, you probably need to just back a car into a mailbox. But it opens like that regularly, and it's really good because look how much room I have. It's absolutely enormous, which means that when you've got a big rearwards facing baby seat like this one, you've got plenty of room to simply chuck it in like so. So I've got that in place here, and I've moved the passenger seat forward just a little bit, but really not all that much, and I've got a little bit more to work with, I think. Interestingly, this is one of the few mid-size SUVs where I've actually been able to put our Chasing Cars rearwards facing baby seat behind my own driving position. So if you've got 2 little kiddos and you do need these kinds of seats, this might be one to consider for those reasons. Time now to talk about the boot. So let's open up the power tailgate, lovely addition there. And first thing you'll notice is how big this hatch is. Personally, when I've been parking this at my place, I've had to back the car off a little bit more than I do regularly for fear of this bumping up the garage door. So a little bit interesting there. However, if that's not in your situation, then don't worry about it, I suppose. So we revealed this pretty decent space, and I've got it in the 2-row configuration right now, which is pretty big at 472 litres. If I put the 3rd row in place like so, via this convenient little pull strap thing, really brilliant that actually, I've got 150 litres of space. So look, there's a little bit of room here, but not a ton. And you'll notice that I've got this kind of strange little parcel shelf thing here. It's got a little bit of space underneath and it kind of sits here. But when I put it back down with these seats here, the one thing I've noticed is that it's got this huge big crack in the middle, and it's a little bit inconvenient. Personally, I've had all sorts of items like fruit and other shopping just roll down into the Neverland down here, and it's been kind of a little bit awkward situation. So a little bit of finessing there, Honda, but otherwise I think this is a pretty good boot space. We have some things like a 12-volt socket over here, and we also have, if I get this thing out the way and look down very carefully, right underneath, there is a space saver spare wheel under there. So despite having 7 seats, you still have a space saver spare. But while I'm standing here at the rear of the vehicle, it brings me to my next point, which is towing capacity, which is surprisingly very bad with the CR-V. Now, this isn't a big rig tow vehicle. We're not going to expect huge numbers, but even still, this is rated at 1,000 kilos on the 7-seat version, 1,500 on some of the others, but 1,000 on this one. And honestly, I'm really not sure why it's so bad. For context, the Volkswagen Tiguan Allspace on some of those grades, it's up to 2.5 ton. That's as much as a Ford Ranger Raptor, which is a body-on-frame vehicle. So there are certainly some other competitors which have more capacity in this area. I don't even know why you'd bother getting a tow bar, honestly. Maybe for a bike rack, but even then, you're probably going to want to play it on the safe side and go for something with a carbon frame. Two things I also will note to the detriment of this boot is the fact that it's kind of a little bit short. Personally, this week when I've been having my pram in the back here, I've been struggling to fit it in a lengthways proposition. I've had to turn it around to kind of make it fit. So that was a little bit disappointing. And if you are looking at using one of these as a family car, I'd recommend that you measure up the boot to make sure it suits you, because when you have to turn the pram that way, it kind of takes up all the room and it makes what is a decent sized boot not all that decent anymore. And when it comes to other sort of cargo, I'll also note that there's no tie down points in the back of here of any sort. It's got to be the first time I've seen that in a SUV-like vehicle. So definitely a little bit of improvement needed there, Honda. So how much is this Honda CR-V actually going to cost you to run? Well, let's start with fuel. So despite having a more sophisticated 1.5 litre turbocharged engine, this can still run on 91 octane fuel. The official combined consumption claim is 7.3 litres per 100 Ks. However, in our testing, we've seen closer to about 8.3 litres per 100 Ks. When it comes to servicing, well, this has got intervals of every 10,000 kilometres or 1 year. So on the distance side, it's a little bit more restrictive than some others out there. As far as costs, well, this is a Honda, so it's pretty darn affordable to get serviced, at least for the first 5 services, bringing it to a total of $995 over the first 5 years.
The CR-V, like every other Honda, is covered by a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. It's notable though that earlier this year, Honda temporarily offered a 7-year deal on the CR-V, and we do hope that becomes a permanent fixture of the range in time, like we've previously seen with Skoda before they moved to a permanent 7-year warranty.
So what's it like to drive the CR-V? Well, like most things with this vehicle, it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's not really all much of a complicated task, and things like naturally good visibility, a car that listens to you and is actually easy to feel and understand on the road pulls together to make a vehicle which, as I said, it's pretty simple to understand, and as a vehicle that's meant to be a daily driver, I think that's a pretty darn good thing. So let's delve into that a little bit more, starting with the engine. So this generation of CR-V has moved to pretty much an entirely turbocharged lineup with the exception of the hybrid, which has a naturally aspirated 2 litre. This is a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. And the effect is great for 2 reasons. First of all, it makes a good amount of grunt. It makes 140 kilowatts of power at 6,000 RPM, whereas torque, it's 240, which isn't the best in the business, I gotta say, from 1,700 RPM all the way to 5,000 RPM. And double that with a CVT transmission and you have a pretty punchy thing off the line, considering its relatively meager outfits and physically reasonably large dimensions. Often I'll complain about CVT transmissions because they really do go hunting for power high in the rev range, as is also the case with this one when you're really starting to push the limit for whatever reason. But for that around town driving, because we have that base of torque at a reasonably low RPM, this doesn't get very loud all that often, and it's definitely something I've certainly appreciated during my week with this car. It's not really all that noisy, and when you're pulling onto the highway, maybe you might get a little bit more, and if you feel so inclined, you can go drive this dynamically, and it does start to get a little bit louder. As I said, that peak in power is all the way up at 6,000 RPM, but for the most of your driving, you're not really going to hear it, and so I think the CVT gets a pass in this regard. When it comes to outright refinement, Honda did make some great strides in this new 6th generation. That's something they really wanted to focus on to make this a more premium experience, and I really do think they have achieved that. Not long ago, I was driving the previous generation CR-V, and one of my biggest complaints was it was just so loud. Everything was loud, everything was noisy from the engine, which was naturally aspirated, I should note, and also wind noise and road noise, whereas this has made a big improvement. No, it's not as good as something like a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz or any of those other, premium priced models, but it's a big step forward. And it's one of the many reasons which I've come to sort of nickname the CR-V as a bit of a Japanese Volkswagen Tiguan, because they have similar strengths in that regard. Another one of the ways where this is similar to the Volkswagen Tiguan is in its driving experience. As I said earlier, it's just very direct, very easy to understand, and it feels sure of itself. One of the things I'm not as fond of with the Toyota RAV4, for example, is it is a little bit roly-poly in its driving demeanor. Yes, it's very capable, and yes, it's very comfortable, but if you want to go on a fast-flowing country road, you're going to be tossed around a little bit to and fro. And I wouldn't say the same for the CR-V. This one is on 18-inch wheels, and there are some models on 19s which feel a little bit more sharper in that regard, but as a family SUV, I think this is a good trade-off. You remain comfortable and you're not getting thrown about to and from in the cabin while sitting comfortably on the speed limit. In fact, when you do start to really lean into the capability of the CR-V, I think many people would be quite surprised at just how capable this thing is. We've seen this with the Civic, which is very impressive and sits on a similar version of this platform, also with the ZR-V and also with the HR-V. All of these vehicles are surprisingly capable and could probably set a quick lap time if you felt so inclined. But I think the end result, as I said, is more a vehicle which feels comfortable doing most tasks and won't feel all that challenged. One of the reasons I think it's able to pull this off while remaining a comfortable vehicle is the fact that it's not really all that heavy. 1,700 kilos for this, which isn't, class leading lightness, but considering this has 7 seats on board, I think that's fairly impressive. Of course, part of the reason it's a little bit lighter is the fact that it doesn't have an all-wheel drive system, and I do think that is a disappointing aspect of this vehicle. Though I will say that with the caveat that, look, I'm not really sure that Honda does an all-wheel drive worth getting, to be perfectly honest. I have driven all-wheel drive versions of the CR-V, and there's several manufacturers out there who, when they develop these on-demand all-wheel drive systems, make them so they are not very eager to engage their real wheels. And it means that even if you do have the extra spend, manufacturers like Hyundai and Kia, for example, they also have these really hesitant systems, and Honda is the same. And I'm not really sure that if you're looking at a CR-V and you're looking for extra grip and practicality, that they're even really worth getting that extra spend. If you're looking for some extra traction, perhaps something like a Subaru with its permanent all-wheel drive system is a little bit more worth the cash. That doesn't really seem to be where the strengths of the CR-V lie, so perhaps it's not such a big loss after all. Finally, let's talk about safety. This is a little bit of a tricky one. Right now, the CR-V doesn't actually have any sort of rating from ANCAP, though I understand that Honda is in the process of trying to get one for themselves, and I would expect that it would get 5 stars, though of course we don't know the result until it comes to light. There's a number of reasons why I think it would get a pretty good result though. Number one, it has 11 airbags. It's quite a considerable amount of them, and they're in the really good places you need. So there's modern innovations, like I often like to mention, as a front center airbag. That goes right here and it stops you and your passenger clashing together. Very good stuff. Another one that's really good for kids in particular, and that third row, is the fact that it has curtain airbags all the way from the first, second, and third row, which means that that third row is actually a place that you might be willing to put children because there's more of a chance they're going to be protected in the event of an accident. So that's certainly some points for the CR-V there. And it joins one of a few vehicles in this class which actually do have airbag coverage all the way into that third row. So bravo Honda there. Another good thing about the safety aspect of the CR-V is the bulk of the equipment that actually matters is equipped on the base model throughout the rest of the range. So you don't have to pay a premium price to get all the safety equipment that you want. I'm talking about front and rear parking sensors and also some pretty advanced AEB, which is capable of detecting pedestrians and cyclists in a range of different conditions. One of the simple changes that Honda made to the AEB system was they made the angle of identification a lot wider than it was in the previous model. So it's a sort of great feature we like to see to lessen your chances of getting in an unfortunate accident. There are some other features as well, like adaptive cruise control, which I've found to be pretty effective and well tuned during my week with the car. Also lane keep assistance and a few other different pieces of software which haven't been too annoying while still remaining helpful. So overall, a pretty good score for the CR-V in that regard, though I am very interested to see what score it ultimately ends up with ANCAP's testing.
Over in North America, Honda buyers are treated to a genuine 3-row proposition in the form of the Pilot Large SUV. But if you want 7 seats in Australia, the Honda CR-V is as big as you're going to get.
But while the CR-V may not be as spacious inside as that model, I do think it's a pretty good compromise for our market. Between its clever back seats, long feature list, and also its larger body style, which has afforded greater interior space this generation, I think it comes together as a pretty good package overall. In saying that, the midsize SUV segment is a really competitive environment, and it's disappointing to see that the CR-V is only available with 7 seats as a front-wheel drive option, when others such as the Mitsubishi Outlander offer both a all-wheel drive proposition and a hybrid system along with it with 7-seat options. So, there's definitely some room for improvement there. Currently, Honda limits its hybrid drivetrain exclusively to its very top model, and I think it would be great to see that filtered down through the range to stem that at times quite thirsty petrol engine. However, they have told us that they're looking at doing this later on, but I don't know if it's going to make its way into this 7-seat option. If you are interested in getting a 7-seat CR-V, I would encourage you to check out the VTI X7, as it has all the important safety features and tech features of this model, and it will save you a good amount of money. I personally would still go for this one because, as a family man, the idea of having that increased weatherproofing from those leather seats and also just some of the niceties in there really do appeal for me. And I think that model, even with its extra upcharge, is still pretty darn good value. But those have just been my thoughts today on this CR-V, and I'm really keen to hear what you guys have to say down in the comments about this model. Have you picked one up yourself? Are you looking at doing so? Please let me know down in those comments. As I said, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more if you want to see more content like this. But for now, that's all. Thank you for watching Chasing Cars.